This is the story of a nation torn apart, where brothers became enemies and ideals clashed on the blood-soaked fields of battle. Journey with us through the American Civil War, as we unravel the events that ignited this fierce conflict. From the simmering tensions of a divided nation to the thunderous roar of cannon fire at Gettysburg, we'll take you through every skirmish, battle, and pivotal decision. Meet the legendary generals who led their men with unwavering resolve, both Union and Confederate. Join us as we bring to life the stories of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless fight for a nation's soul. This is more than history. This is the essence of America's struggle for unity. Buckle up, because this journey through the American Civil War will captivate, inform, and leave you wanting more. The weight of the nation's crisis fell heavy on April 18, 1861. In Virginia, a son wrestled with his conscience. The decision he faced was monumental, one that would define his legacy and the fate of his homeland. The young man knew that his choice would echo through history. Robert E. Lee, offered command of the Union Army, chose his home state over the Union. His loyalty to Virginia was unwavering, even as the nation he once served began to fracture. He couldn't raise his sword against Virginia. The thought of fighting against his own people, his own family, was unbearable. His heart and soul were bound to the land of his birth. Meanwhile, another esteemed soldier made a momentous choice. Albert Sidney Johnston, a man of great military prowess and honor, faced a similar dilemma. Albert Sidney Johnston, a man of war, cast his lot with the Confederacy. His decision was driven by a deep sense of duty and loyalty to his fellow Southerners. His experience and leadership were a crucial gain for the South. The Confederacy welcomed his expertise, knowing that his skills would be invaluable in the battles to come. In Arkansas, Confederate sympathizers moved swiftly. They seized the United States Army depot at Pine Bluff. Muskets, cannons, and vital supplies fell into Southern hands. It was a bloodless victory, but a victory nonetheless. Far to the south, Texas played its part. The steamship Star of the West, once a symbol of federal authority, was captured. She was carrying supplies intended for Fort Sumter. Now she belonged to the Confederacy. With each passing hour, the Confederacy tightened its grip. Each seized asset, a brick in the foundation of a new nation. Washington City, the nation's capital, felt the tremors of approaching war. Pennsylvania volunteers, answering Lincoln's call, arrived weary but resolute. Their journey was marked by chaos and uncertainty. The city itself was a whirlwind of activity. Trenches were dug, defenses erected. The shadow of war loomed large, casting a pall over the unfinished dome of the Capitol building. The Capitol was bracing itself, preparing to become the central stage in a drama that would decide the fate of the nation. The seas have always been a crucial theater of war, where control can dictate the outcome of entire conflicts. Off the coast of Florida, tensions simmered around Fort Pickens. This strategic location was a focal point of contention, a symbol of control and power. Confederate emissaries demanded its surrender. The Union commander, resolute and unwavering, refused to yield. The standoff was a microcosm of the larger conflict brewing across the nation. The stars and stripes still flew over the fort, but for how long? The flag was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a beacon of hope and defiance. In Virginia, the mighty warship Merrimac, once the pride of the U.S. Navy, was scuttled to prevent its capture. This drastic measure underscored the desperation and strategic calculations of the time. The act was a testament to the gravity of the situation. The destruction of such a valuable asset was a clear signal of the lengths to which each side would go. No sacrifice was too great to keep vital assets out of enemy hands. Control of the seas would be paramount in the coming conflict. Both sides knew it. Naval power would determine supply lines, troop movements, and ultimately, the fate of nations. In Baltimore, passions ignited. The city was a microcosm of the nation's turmoil, with neighbors turning against each other, and the streets filled with heated debates and confrontations. Nicholas Biddle, a former U.S. Navy officer now loyal to the South, tried to steal a train engine. His daring plan was to cripple the Union's ability to move troops and supplies, a bold move that reflected the desperation and determination of the Confederacy. His aim, to disrupt Union supply lines. The train, a symbol of industrial might, was a critical asset in the war effort, and Biddle's attempt highlighted the strategic importance of railroads. The attempt failed, but it underscored the chaos engulfing the nation. The streets of Baltimore were a battleground of ideologies, with every failed plot adding to the tension. Down in Norfolk, Virginia, another ship changed hands. The bustling shipyards were scenes of strategic maneuvers and sudden takeovers. The schooner Buchanan was seized by Virginia militia. This act of defiance was a clear message to the Union, showcasing the South's resolve. It was a small victory, but symbolic nonetheless. The cheers of the soldiers echoed the hopes of a divided people, each side believing in the righteousness of their cause. Every ship, every cannon, every bullet could tip the scales. The preparation for war was meticulous, with each side amassing resources and readying for the inevitable clash. April 19, 1861. Following the secession of 7 southern states and the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter on April 12, Abraham Lincoln issued this response.
In response to this act of aggression, I, President Abraham Lincoln, issued a proclamation on April 19, 1861, declaring a blockade of all southern ports from South Carolina to Texas, a measure aimed at curbing the rebellion.
This decisive action marked a pivotal moment in the conflict, transforming a localized rebellion into a full-fledged war, with far-reaching consequences for both the Union and the Confederacy. The proclamation, a stark document etched with the gravity of the situation, signaled Lincoln's unwavering resolve to preserve the Union, no matter the cost. The blockade, a bold strategic maneuver, aimed to cripple the Confederacy's economy, which relied heavily on the export of cotton and the import of manufactured goods, essential for their war effort. By severing these vital lifelines, Lincoln intended to starve the Confederacy of resources and financially cripple its ability to wage war, hoping to bring a swift end to the conflict and restore peace to the nation. The Union, however, faced a daunting challenge in enforcing the blockade. The Confederate coastline, stretching over 3,500 miles, presented a vast and porous maritime border. Patrolling this expansive area with any degree of effectiveness would require a naval force far larger than what the Union had at its disposal. At the outset of the war, the United States Navy was a shadow of its future self. It boasted a mere 42 commissioned warships, many of which were outdated or in dire need of repair. The task of blockading the Confederacy's extensive coastline seemed almost insurmountable with such limited resources. The Union Navy found itself stretched thin, its ships scattered across a vast expanse of ocean. The Confederacy, meanwhile, exploited this weakness, employing small, fast vessels to slip through the blockade under the cover of darkness or during inclement weather. The logistical challenges of maintaining a blockade of this magnitude were immense. The Union Navy faced a chronic shortage of ships, men, and supplies. Coal, a vital fuel for steam-powered warships, was in short supply, forcing ships to rely on sail power, which greatly reduced their speed and maneuverability. The blockade runners, as they came to be known, posed a constant challenge to the Union Navy. These vessels, often lightly armed and crewed by experienced seamen, relied on their speed and agility to evade capture. They became a thorn in the side of the Union, ferrying vital supplies into the Confederacy and sustaining its war effort. Early in the war, the blockade's effectiveness was limited. Confederate ships continued to operate with relative impunity, their holds laden with cotton bound for European markets, and returning with much-needed munitions and supplies. As the Union grappled with the immense challenges of enforcing the blockade, events on land took a violent and unexpected turn. On April 19, 1861, the very same day President Lincoln declared the blockade, a significant riot erupted in Baltimore, Maryland. This incident, a microcosm of the nation's deep and growing divisions, further inflamed tensions and highlighted the precariousness of the Union's position during this tumultuous period. Baltimore, a city with strong Southern sympathies and divided loyalties, became a flashpoint for violence and unrest when a regiment of Massachusetts volunteers, en route to Washington, D.C. to support the Union cause, was viciously attacked by a pro-Confederate mob. The ensuing riot resulted in the tragic deaths of 4 soldiers and 12 civilians, marking the first significant bloodshed of the Civil War on Northern soil. The Baltimore riot had immediate and far-reaching consequences. It severed rail lines between the North and the nation's capital, effectively cutting off Washington, D.C. from reinforcements and supplies. The city found itself isolated, vulnerable to attack, and teetering on the brink of chaos. Relief efforts were swiftly organized, with Union troops eventually reaching Washington, D.C. by sea. The city, however, remained on edge, its inhabitants acutely aware of the Confederate forces gathering just across the Potomac River in Virginia. The incident also highlighted the strategic importance of Maryland, a border state that had not yet seceded. Its geographic location, bordering the nation's capital, made it a crucial prize for both sides. The Confederacy, emboldened by its early successes and the Union's struggles, pinned its hopes on breaking the blockade. They believed that their initial victories could be leveraged to gain a strategic advantage. They invested heavily in blockade runners, commissioning swift vessels specifically designed to outrun Union warships. These ships were built with the latest technology and materials available at the time. These ships, often painted gray to blend in with the sea and equipped with powerful engines, became the lifeline of the Confederacy. They were crucial for transporting essential goods, including weapons, medicine, and other supplies. The Confederacy's efforts to circumvent the blockade extended beyond its own borders. They sent diplomats across the Atlantic to negotiate with European powers. They actively sought recognition and support from European powers, particularly Great Britain and France, both of whom relied heavily on Southern cotton for their textile industries. The South's cotton was a critical component of the European textile economy. The Confederacy hoped to leverage this economic dependence to secure diplomatic recognition and potentially military aid. They believed that the economic pressure could force European nations to intervene on their behalf. The international community, however, remained wary of formally recognizing the Confederacy, fearing entanglement in a protracted and bloody conflict. European leaders were cautious about getting involved in what they saw as an internal American issue. The Union's blockade, despite its early inconsistencies, played a crucial role in influencing this decision. The Union Navy's persistent efforts to maintain the blockade showcased their determination. By demonstrating its resolve to maintain the blockade and strangle the Confederacy's economy, the Union effectively deterred foreign powers from intervening directly in the conflict. This strategic move was pivotal in shaping the course of the Civil War. Frederick Douglass, a former slave and a towering figure in the abolitionist movement, understands the gravity of the situation. He sees an opportunity in the unfolding crisis, a chance to strike a blow against the institution of slavery and secure the freedom of his people. Douglass proposes the formation of African Zouave regiments, comprised of black soldiers eager to fight for the Union. His idea, though initially met with resistance, would eventually pave the way for the widespread enlistment of African Americans in the Union Army, forever changing the course of the war. As tensions escalate, events unfold rapidly across the nation. In Louisiana, Confederate authorities seize the Star of the West, a federal supply ship, and rename it the CSS St. Philip. This act of defiance underscores the Confederacy's determination to assert its independence and control its own destiny. The ship, once a symbol of federal authority, now becomes a tool of the rebellion, serving as a naval station and hospital ship. Meanwhile, in Maryland, a state torn between its loyalty to the Union and its Southern sympathies, the USS Constitution, a legendary warship and a symbol of American might, is moved to the Chesapeake Bay. The goal is to protect this national treasure from falling into Confederate hands. The movement of troops, the securing of strategic locations, all point to the growing realization that war is imminent. As the day unfolds, a sense of urgency grips both sides. In Maryland, Brigadier General Benjamin Franklin Butler, a Union commander known for his decisiveness, orders the 4th Massachusetts Infantry to Annapolis, their mission to secure the vital rail line between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., ensuring the federal government's connection to the North. However, their path is not without obstacles. Pro-Confederate Marylanders, determined to disrupt the Union's plans, resort to sabotage, burning bridges in a desperate attempt to slow the Union advance. In Missouri, another border state grappling with its loyalties, a pro-secessionist mob seizes the U.S. arsenal at Liberty. The arsenal, containing a significant cache of weapons and ammunition, represents a tempting prize for the Confederacy, which is desperately short of military supplies. In New York, authorities seize 600 kegs of gunpowder destined for New Orleans, a vital port city in the Confederacy. This seizure, A preemptive strike aimed at crippling the South's ability to wage war highlights the strategic importance of controlling vital resources. The Confederacy, lacking the industrial capacity of the North, is heavily reliant on capturing or seizing military supplies. In Texas, another Confederate state, the Coast Survey schooner Twilight is captured at Arkansas. This small but significant victory provides the Confederacy with a much-needed vessel, bolstering its fledgling navy. Every ship, every cannon, every musket could tip the balance in the coming conflict. The morning of April 21, 1861, dawned with tension hanging heavy in the air. Off the coast of Africa, the USS Saratoga intercepted the slave ship Nightingale. Over 900 enslaved Africans were on board. In D.C., Colonel Smith took control of steamers to prevent Confederate use. Governor Hicks of Maryland refused Union troops passage, fearing conflict. Union forces secured the Philadelphia and Baltimore Railroad, cutting off Confederate routes. As the day progressed, the need for reinforcements became increasingly clear. From New York City, a steady stream of Union volunteers boarded trains, answering President Lincoln's call to defend the nation's capital. These citizen soldiers, many leaving behind families and livelihoods, journeyed southwards, their determination fueled by a mix of patriotism and apprehension. Their arrival in Washington, D.C. provided a much-needed boost to the morale of the city's defenders. In a strategic move to cripple the Confederacy's financial capabilities, state forces seized control of U.S. mints in North Carolina, Louisiana, and Georgia. This bold action aimed to deprive the Confederate government of vital resources needed to finance the war effort. The seizure of these mints represented a significant blow to the Confederacy, limiting their ability to mint coinage and secure loans. Recognizing the growing naval threat, U.S. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles issued urgent orders to arm more steamers. He understood that control of the waterways would be crucial in the conflict ahead. Shipyards across the North hummed with activity as workers toiled day and night, converting merchant vessels into warships, their clanging hammers a testament to the nation's resolve. Meanwhile, at the Gosport Navy Yard in Portsmouth, Virginia, a dramatic and disheartening scene unfolded. Union sailors, unable to remove all the ships before Confederate forces arrived, were forced to scuttle several U.S. Navy vessels. The ships, once symbols of American might, sank beneath the waves, a poignant reminder of the nation's division. Among the vessels scuttled was the steam frigate USS Merrimack, which the Confederates would later raise and rebuild as the ironclad CSS Virginia. The Confederates wasted no time in capitalizing on their gains. Work began immediately to raise the scuttled USS Merrimack and transform her into the ironclad CSS Virginia. This powerful warship, they believed, would challenge the Union's naval supremacy. The race was on to see which side could leverage their naval capabilities to gain a decisive advantage. Along the Potomac River, Confederate Brigadier General Philip St. George Cocke assumed command of a crucial defensive line. His mission to prevent any Union advance southwards and protect the Confederate capital at Richmond. Cocke's appointment highlighted the strategic importance of the Potomac River, which served as a natural barrier between the warring factions. Despite the escalating tensions and the very real threat of war, pockets of resistance to secession remained. In Monongahela County, Virginia, a Union rally drew large crowds. These brave citizens, risking accusations of treason, voiced their unwavering support for the Union and denounced the Confederacy's actions. Their defiant stand served as a beacon of hope, reminding the nation that even in these dark times, the spirit of unity had not been extinguished. April 22, 1861 in Washington, Brigadier General Joseph Eggleston Johnston, a career soldier, a man torn, offered his resignation from the United States Army. Johnston, a Virginian by birth, felt the pull of his home state, a loyalty that superseded his oath to the Union. Johnston's departure left a void, a crack in the foundation of the Union Army. His experience, his knowledge, were irreplaceable, especially in these uncertain times. The weight of command fell upon the shoulders of those who remained, men like Captain Montgomery Cunningham Meigs. Thrust into the role of Quartermaster General, Meigs faced the daunting task of supplying an army on the brink of war. His was a logistical nightmare, a race against time to gather the resources needed to sustain the Union's fight for survival. But loyalty, once a given, was now a luxury the Union could ill afford. Suspicions fell upon Brigadier General William Selby Harney, a man whose heart seemed drawn to the siren song of the Confederacy. His allegiance, once unquestioned, was now shrouded in doubt. The Union, already reeling from Johnston's departure, could ill afford another defection, especially from a commander of Harney's stature. The very fabric of the army seemed to unravel, thread by thread, as the nation marched inexorably towards the abyss. Amidst this turmoil, a glimmer of hope emerged from an unexpected source. Commander James Harmon Ward, a visionary naval officer, presented a daring plan. His flying flotilla, a small but agile force of gunboats, promised to control the Mississippi River, the nation's vital artery. Ward's plan, a beacon of innovation in a sea of uncertainty, offered the Union a fighting chance, a way to strike at the heart of the Confederacy. In Washington, the scramble for resources reached a fever pitch. Every musket, every cannon, every pound of powder became precious, a matter of national survival. Captain Meigs, thrust into the crucible of leadership, worked tirelessly, his every waking moment consumed by the logistics of war. The Union's fate, he knew, rested on his shoulders, on his ability to equip and supply the men who would soon be called upon to fight. But the Confederacy too understood the importance of material. Across the South, arsenals became battlegrounds, prizes to be seized and secured. In Arkansas, Governor Henry M. Rector, a fiery secessionist, refused to release federal weapons to the Union. Rector's defiance, a microcosm of the South's resistance, underscored the depth of the divide. The Union, already stretched thin, faced the daunting prospect of fighting not only a determined enemy, but also a hostile population. The race to secure resources extended beyond weapons and supplies. The Confederacy, desperate for experienced leadership, looked to men like Captain Franklin Buchanan. A respected naval officer, Buchanan resigned his commission in the United States Navy, choosing instead to lend his expertise to the fledgling Confederate Navy. His defection, a blow to the Union's morale, highlighted the difficult choices facing men of principle on both sides of the conflict. Meanwhile, in Washington, Commander John Adolphus Bernard Dahlgren, a brilliant ordnance officer, worked feverishly to bolster the Union's defenses. Dahlgren, a pioneer in naval artillery, understood the importance of firepower in the coming conflict. His innovative designs, his relentless pursuit of excellence, would prove crucial in the Union's struggle to maintain control of the seas. The fate of the nation, it seemed, hinged on the ability of men like Meigs, Buchanan, and Dahlgren to forge the instruments of war, to tip the scales in favor of their respective causes. As the nation teetered on the precipice of war, state militias became pawns in a dangerous game. In Illinois, Governor Richard Yates, a staunch Unionist, ordered the state militia to seize the strategic city of Cairo, located at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Cairo, with its vital rail lines and its commanding position on the Mississippi, represented a crucial strategic asset. Yates's decisive action, a bold assertion of Union authority, sent a clear message to the Confederacy. The North would not surrender its territory without a fight. Meanwhile, in Maryland, a state deeply divided in its loyalties, the arrival of state militia in Annapolis heightened tensions. Maryland, a slave state with strong economic ties to both North and South, found itself caught in the middle of a conflict it did not seek. The presence of armed men, their allegiances unclear, only served to exacerbate the already volatile situation. The streets of Annapolis crackled with unease, a microcosm of a nation on the brink. The situation in Maryland underscored the precarious balance of power in the border states. These states, geographically and culturally situated between North and South, held the key to the outcome of the war. Their allegiance, their resources, could tip the scales in favor of either side. The Confederacy, desperate to expand its territory and secure vital resources, viewed the border states as ripe for the taking. The Union, determined to preserve its territorial integrity, vowed to defend every inch of its soil. The mobilization of state militias, while seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of war, represented a crucial turning point. It signaled a shift from words to actions, from political posturing to military preparedness. The nation, once content to debate the merits of secession, now found itself on a collision course, its citizens forced to choose sides in a conflict that threatened to tear the country apart. In Virginia, the tension reached a fever pitch. Major General Robert E. Lee, a man of impeccable credentials and unwavering principle, faced an agonizing decision. Torn between his loyalty to the Union, which he had served faithfully for decades, and his allegiance to his native Virginia, Lee chose the latter. Lee, a brilliant strategist and a symbol of Southern honor, would go on to become the Confederacy's most revered military leader. The border states, caught in the crossfire of a nation divided, became crucibles of loyalty. Their strategic importance, their economic and military resources, made them prizes to be fought over. But for the families torn apart, for the communities shattered by the winds of war, the stakes were far more personal. The border states, it seemed, embodied the tragedy of the Civil War, a conflict that pitted brother against brother, friend against friend, in a struggle for the very soul of a nation. The news spread like wildfire, igniting passions from north to south. The United States arsenal at Fayetteville, North Carolina, had fallen. Confederate troops, acting on the orders of their newly formed government, had seized control of the arsenal and its valuable stores of weapons and ammunition. The arsenal's fall, a symbolic blow to the Union's prestige, represented a decisive moment in the nation's descent into war. The seizure of federal property, once unthinkable, had now become a reality. The Confederacy, emboldened by its early successes, seemed poised to strike at the very heart of the Union. The North, outraged by this act of aggression, demanded a swift and decisive response. The drums of war, once a distant rumble, now beat with a deafening roar, calling upon the nation to take up arms in defense of its ideals. The fall of the Fayetteville Arsenal, while strategically significant, paled in comparison to the psychological impact it had on both sides of the conflict. For the Confederacy, it represented a tangible victory, a sign that the South was willing to fight and win its independence. For the Union, it served as a stark reminder of the fragility of the nation, the ease with which decades of unity could be shattered by the forces of division. April 23, 1861. Let's start with Fort Smith, Arkansas. Established in 1817 by Major William Bradford of the 3rd U.S. Rifles, the fort got its name from Colonel Thomas A. Smith, commander of U.S. forces west of the Mississippi. The location was carefully chosen by Captain Stephen H. Long, perched on a rocky bluff where the Arkansas and Poteau rivers meet, known as Bell Point. Fort Smith has seen its fair share of turbulence. Initially evacuated in 1824, it saw intermittent use until 1834. By the spring of 1839, Captain Charles W. Thomas began constructing a second Fort Smith, reconfiguring it as a supply depot by 1841. During the Mexican War, Fort Smith served as a vital supply post. Though an order for deactivation came post-war, it was reversed in 1850, keeping the fort operational. A key departure point for the California Gold Rush of 1849, Fort Smith remained a gateway to the far west. On April 23, 1861, Captain Samuel Davis Sturgis of the 1st U.S. Cavalry evacuated Fort Smith upon the approach of secessionist militia. The following day, these secessionists took control, even though Arkansas had not yet formally seceded from the Union. On the very same day, far away in the District of Columbia, the USS Pawnee reached Washington. Commodore Paulding reported the loss of the Norfolk Navy Yard. The arrival of this modern warship was a critical boost to the capital's defenses, yet the news of Norfolk's loss was a severe setback for the U.S. Navy. In Maryland, Brigadier General of the Massachusetts Militia offered assistance to the Governor of Maryland, who was anxious about the risk of a slave insurrection. Meanwhile, in Missouri, U.S. Army Captain Nathaniel Lyon took temporary command of the Department of the West in St. Louis, due to doubts about Brigadier General William Selby Harney's loyalty, as he had shown indications of favoring pro-Confederate factions in Missouri. In Ohio, George Brinton McClellan was appointed Major General in command of the Ohio Militia. His services were highly regarded and sought after by other states, including Pennsylvania. Down in Texas, U.S. Army officers and a company of the 8th U.S. Infantry were taken as prisoners of war in San Antonio, ending the presence of free federal forces in Texas. Colonel Carlos Adolphus Waite was among those captured. Virginia saw significant military appointments on April 23, 1861. State Major General Robert Edward Lee took command of the militia and the Provisional Army of Virginia. Major General Walter Gwynn was directed to command forces around Norfolk and the Gosport Navy Yard, while Major General Joseph Eggleston Johnston was assigned command of Virginia state forces in and around Richmond. Now let's turn to April 24, 1861. Let's start in Kentucky. Governor Beriah Magoffin called an extra session of the state legislature to mull over secession. Kentucky, a border state, found itself caught between North and South, and this move by Magoffin underscored the tension and uncertainty of the times. Now we move to Maryland. A special election took place in Baltimore, selecting 10 delegates for the state legislature. Maryland, another border state, balanced on a knife edge with strong sympathies on both sides of the conflict. Also in Maryland, the historic USS Constitution, affectionately known as Old Ironsides, departed under Lieutenant G.W. Rogers. Its mission? To sail to New York and Newport, Rhode Island. This venerable warship was to be transferred to the U.S. Naval Academy for training and ceremonial purposes. Escorted by the USS Harriet Lane and towed by the USS Curler, Old Ironsides was a symbol of the nation's storied naval history. In Virginia, Brigadier General Philip St. George Cocke faced a daunting challenge. Reporting from Alexandria, he had only 300 men to defend against an estimated 10,000 Union troops across the Potomac in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, 1,300 Virginia state volunteers had gathered at Harper's Ferry, ready to support their comrades. Finally, in Hampton Roads, Virginia, the USS Cumberland, under Captain Garrett J. Pendergrast, captured the Confederate tug Young America and schooner George M. Smith. Their cargo of arms and ammunition was a critical blow to the Confederate war effort. On April 25, 1861, a series of strategic moves and confrontations would ripple across the Civil War landscape. In Arkansas, Senator Solon Borland led the militia to seize Fort Smith and Van Buren. These posts, perched on the edge of Indian Territory, were crucial as the terminus of the overland stage to California. Captain Samuel Davis Sturgis of the 1st U.S. Cavalry faced the challenge of a garrison surrounded. When his junior officers jumped ship to join the Confederacy, Sturgis didn't panic. He executed a daring escape to Fort Leavenworth, managing to safeguard most government property. This maneuver demonstrated the resilience and resourcefulness of Union forces, even in dire straits. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the Union capital found itself in a precarious position. The arrival of the 7th New York Militia Infantry, along with 1,200 militiamen from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, changed the game. These reinforcements arrived by train, after relaying tracks and fixing a wrecked locomotive. Before this, the only Union defenders were the 6th Massachusetts Infantry and some Pennsylvania companies who had taken shelter in the very halls of Congress. This infusion of troops ended Washington's isolation from the North, bolstering the morale and defense of the capital. In Illinois, Union Captain Nathaniel Lyon acted swiftly, moving arms and military stores from St. Louis to Alton. He knew the state's pro-Confederate forces in Missouri were a looming threat. Through coordinated efforts, Captain James H. Stokes transported 12,500 muskets to arm Union militia troops in Illinois. This clandestine operation showcased the Union's proactive steps to secure its resources and prepare for the brewing conflict. Over in New York, the transport Empire City docked with 600 men from the 3rd U.S. Infantry and 2nd U.S. Cavalry. These troops had been withdrawn from Texas following its secession. Their arrival was a significant boost for the Union, as many garrisons had been either captured or were forced to navigate risky escapes by sea. This transfer underscored the complex logistics and the broader strategic shifts in the Union's military positioning. In Texas, Forts Indianola and Siluria surrendered to Confederate forces under Colonel Earl Van Dorn. Major Caleb C. Sibley, leading the garrison from Fort McIntosh, found himself with 450 prisoners at Siluria. This capitulation was a stark reminder of the shifting control and the Confederacy's expanding influence. Finally, Fort Stockton, established at Comanche Springs by Lieutenant Walter Jones, fell to the Confederates. Initially named Camp Stockman, this fort was part of a critical chain protecting the San Antonio-El Paso road to California. The Confederates held it only briefly, abandoning it in 1862, but its capture on April 25, 1861, marked another significant Confederate gain. Then, on April 26, 1861, Confederate Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Russell Mallory, had a vision. He proposed a new class of warships combining speed, firepower, and durability like never before. Imagine the CSS Sumter and CSS McRae, fitted out as cruisers, ready to take on the Union Navy. Mallory also pushed for innovation with rifled guns. These weapons had greater range and accuracy than anything the Navy had seen. He believed small, fast, propeller-driven ships, lightly armed with these rifled guns, would be the most destructive force in naval warfare. Mallory's appointment gave him the perfect platform to test out his revolutionary ideas. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Governor Joseph E. Brown issued a proclamation. He called for the repudiation of all debts owed to creditors in Union states, a bold move showing the growing divide between the North and the South. Up in Maryland, the state legislature reassembled in Frederick. At the same time, Annapolis was occupied by Union troops under Brigadier General Benjamin Franklin Butler. The USS Commerce, led by Lieutenant Pierce Crosby, captured the steamer Lancaster at Havre de Grace. Though Crosby pursued a steam-driven tug, he couldn't quite catch it. Pro-Confederate forces were active too, burning bridges over Gunpowder and Bush Creeks on the Philadelphia and Baltimore Railroad. This was a strategic move, aiming to disrupt Union supply lines. In Virginia, Joseph Eggleston Johnston was appointed Major General of Virginia Volunteers. He took command of the state forces gathering around Richmond, readying for the battles ahead. On April 27, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln took decisive actions to preserve the Union. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus along the railroad from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia. This meant that military authorities could arrest and detain individuals without trial to ensure the safety of key transportation routes. Meanwhile, Lincoln extended the naval blockade to include North Carolina and Virginia, now part of the Confederacy. This blockade aimed to choke off supplies to the southern states. Union Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles ordered Union ships to seize Confederate privateers on the high seas, tightening the noose on the South's maritime activities. Welles also authorized Captain Samuel Livingston Breese and Commander James Harmon Ward to form a flying flotilla of light draft vessels. The Potomac Flotilla, as it was called, was tasked with patrolling the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, operating directly under the Navy Department. Ward took command of this flotilla, focusing on the defense and patrolling of the Potomac River. In the Confederacy, the Virginia State Convention offered Richmond as the new capital, replacing Montgomery, Alabama. This was a strategic move, bringing the capital closer to key battlegrounds. In Washington, 5 men were arrested at the Navy Yard for sabotaging shells by filling them with sand and sawdust, an act aimed at crippling Union defenses. Back in Illinois, the steamer Helmick, loaded with powder and munitions for the Confederacy, was seized at Cairo, thwarting a significant supply route for the South. In Virginia, Confederate Brigadier General Philip St. George Cocke moved his headquarters to Culpeper, overseeing the defense of the Potomac River and organizing volunteer troops for the Alexandria Line. Lastly, Confederate Colonel Thomas Jonathan Jackson, later known as Stonewall Jackson, was assigned to command Virginia volunteers at Harper's Ferry. April 29, 1861. The Confederate States of America, led by President Jefferson Davis, proposed a significant shift in military ranks. Davis urged Congress to create a new grade of general, outranking the existing brigadier generals and major generals of state militias. This move aimed to ensure the Confederate officer held superior credentials, fitting for the new Army's top commanders. This grade of full general was unprecedented in the U.S. Army, marking a strategic innovation for the Confederacy. Meanwhile, in Maryland, the state's House of Delegates voted against secession by 53 to 13 votes. The Senate, too, stood firm, unanimously rejecting secession. Despite loud protests from a pro-Confederate minority, Maryland remained loyal to the Union. However, many men from Maryland still chose to join the Confederate Army, driven by their beliefs. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln responded decisively, issuing an executive proclamation to assert martial law in Maryland. Maryland's governor, Thomas Hicks, protested fervently, communicating with the state legislature about the correspondence between himself, Massachusetts Brigadier General Benjamin Butler, and U.S. Secretary of War Simon Cameron. They discussed the landing of Union troops at Annapolis, reflecting the escalating tensions. On the same day, Union forces reinstated communications between Baltimore and Philadelphia, reinforcing their control. In Ohio, Brigadier General Jacob Dolson Cox of the Ohio Militia took a proactive step. He began constructing a major camp of instruction for Midwestern volunteers at Camp Dennison near Cincinnati. This effort aimed to bolster the Union's military readiness in the region. Virginia witnessed significant military maneuvers. The old warship USS United States was captured at the Norfolk Navy Yard and commissioned as the first vessel of the Virginia State Navy. This capture marked a notable addition to the Confederate naval forces. Virginia's military presence was growing rapidly. Around 8,000 Virginian state troops gathered in Harper's Ferry under Brigadier General Kenton Harper. Confederate Colonel Thomas Jonathan Jackson, later known as Stonewall Jackson, arrived to take command. Simultaneously, another 15,000 men were amassing near Alexandria under Brigadier General Philip St. George Cocke. In contrast, the Union garrison in Washington, D.C. now stood at about 10,000 men. Fort Washita, nestled in the wild Indian Territory of Oklahoma, played a pivotal role in the fight for the soul of a nation. It was a symbol of Union strength, a beacon of civilization in a land rife with uncertainty. See, Fort Washita wasn't just some outpost. It was a symbol of the Union's commitment to protecting the 5 civilized tribes: the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. These tribes had long called these lands home, and the fort stood as a testament to the government's promise to ensure their safety. As the Civil War raged, President Lincoln faced a heart-wrenching decision. The Confederacy was gaining ground, and he needed every man he could get to defend the Union. He knew that pulling troops from the western frontier would leave places like Fort Washita vulnerable, but he had to prioritize the larger war effort. The order came down to evacuate Fort Washita and other western outposts. It was a gamble, a calculated risk that weighed heavily on Lincoln's mind. He knew that abandoning these forts would leave a void, one that the Confederacy would be all too eager to fill, and fill it they did. With the Union troops gone, the Confederacy saw their chance to sway the 5 civilized tribes to their cause. They promised protection, recognition, and a place in their vision of a new nation. Many within the tribes were torn. They had long sought peace and stability, and the war threatened to shatter the fragile harmony they had built. Some tribes, weary of broken promises and eager for self-preservation, chose to side with the Confederacy. Others remained loyal to the Union, hoping against hope that the government they had known would return to restore order. The land was divided, brother against brother, as the conflict ripped through the very heart of Indian Territory. Fort Washita, once a beacon of Union strength, now stood as a silent testament to the Confederacy's reach. Built in 1842, the fort had seen its share of conflict. It had protected settlers during westward expansion, stood as a bulwark against hostile tribes, and even played a role in the Mexican-American War. But now, it was a Confederate stronghold, a symbol of the shifting tides of war. The Confederacy used the fort as a supply depot and a base of operations to further their influence among the tribes. It was a strategic victory for the Confederacy, giving them a foothold in Indian Territory and access to valuable resources. Maryland, May 1st, 1861. The steam tug Lioness was seized by Lieutenant Pierce Crosby off the mouth of the Patapsco River. This bold move by the USS Commerce aimed to disrupt Confederate supply lines and assert Union control over strategic waterways, Nebraska Territory. On the same day, Governor Samuel W. Black called out the territorial militia for Union service. This marked Nebraska's firm commitment to the Union cause, rallying its men to stand against the burgeoning Confederate threat. New Mexico Territory. Colonel William Wing Loring resigned his command of the Union Department of New Mexico, opting to join the Confederacy instead. His departure left a temporary command void, adding tension to the already volatile region. New York. The Union began acquiring the first vessels for the Potomac Flotilla. These ships were tasked with patrolling the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, a crucial step in maintaining Union naval superiority in the region. North Carolina. An extra session of the state legislature convened at Governor Ellis's request. By day's end, they passed a convention bill, setting an election for delegates on May 13, 1861. This legislative action was a pivotal moment, steering North Carolina towards secession. Tennessee. The state legislature passed a joint resolution allowing the governor to appoint commissioners for a military league with the Confederate states. This maneuver solidified Tennessee's alignment with the Confederacy, preparing the state for the imminent conflict. Indian Territory. Confederate forces, along with the Texas militia, occupied the abandoned Fort Washita. Following Lieutenant Colonel William Hemsley Emory's withdrawal to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the fort became a critical Confederate supply depot and military hospital. Near the war's end, the fort was burned and abandoned by Confederate forces, Utah Territory. Frank Fuller succeeded Alfred Cumming as acting governor. This administrative change occurred amidst the larger national turmoil, quietly shifting leadership in the Utah Territory. Virginia. Fort Monroe's Union garrison was reinforced by the 1st Vermont Infantry under Colonel John Wolcott Phelps. Additional volunteer regiments followed swiftly, bolstering the fort's defenses against Confederate forces. Virginia again. Major General Robert Edward Lee dispatched specialist officers and troops to Harper's Ferry Arsenal. Their mission was to dismantle and salvage weapons manufacturing machinery and ordnance stores, preventing them from falling into Union hands. Governor John Letcher issued a call for volunteers to join the state forces, rallying Virginians to the Confederate cause. This call to arms was crucial for building the state's military strength. Finally, U.S. Navy vessels established a blockade of the James River and Hampton Roads. This strategic blockade aimed to choke off Confederate supply lines and assert Union naval dominance in Virginia waters. The Anaconda Plan, proposed by Union General-in-Chief Major General Winfield Scott, aimed to crush the Confederacy. Now, picture this, a giant snake wrapping itself around its prey. That's exactly how Scott envisioned the Union's strategy. Scott's plan was to impose a naval cordon capable of enveloping the seceded states with a total maritime blockade. Think of it like a stranglehold on the Confederacy's resources. He also proposed an offensive movement down the mighty Mississippi River, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. This move was intended to split the Confederacy in two and further tighten the blockade. Scott believed this strategy would bring the secessionists to their knees with less bloodshed than by any other plan. The key here was control of the sea and inland waterways by the Union Navy. So how'd he plan to pull it off? First, strengthen the blockade. No ships in or out of the Confederate ports. Second, split the South by controlling the Mississippi River, effectively cutting the Confederacy in half. Third, support land operations with amphibious assaults, naval gunfire, and river transportation. Meanwhile, on May 2, 1861, Maryland was in a bit of a pickle. The Maryland Committee on U.S. Relations was dealing with the seizure of railroads by the general government and the erection of fortifications. They decided to send commissioners Otho Scott, Robert M. McLean, and William J. Ross to President Abraham Lincoln to see if they could secure some peace and protection for the state. These events marked a critical point in the Civil War, showing both the strategic depth of the Union's plans and the complexities faced by border states like Maryland. The Anaconda Plan was all about squeezing the life out of the Confederacy with precision and relentless pressure. And in the end, well, it proved to be one heck of a strategy. On May 3, 1861, Confederate diplomats sought a lifeline from Great Britain. They engaged in an informal meeting with Lord John Russell, the British foreign minister. The Confederacy desperately craved international legitimacy. Recognition by Great Britain, a global superpower, would be a major coup. It would lend credence to their secession and potentially open doors for financial and military support. The Confederacy believed Britain's economic interests would force its hand. The southern states provided the majority of cotton for Britain's textile industry. They gambled that Britain would side with them to protect their economic interests. However, Russell was cautious. He was wary of entangling Britain in a conflict with the United States. Public opinion in Britain was divided on the issue of slavery. Recognizing the Confederacy, a nation founded on the institution of slavery, would be deeply unpopular with a substantial portion of the British population. This meeting, while significant, did not yield the desired outcome for the Confederacy. Great Britain for now remained neutral, leaving the Confederacy in a precarious diplomatic position. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Abraham Lincoln took decisive action on that same day, May 3, 1861. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, he issued a call for 42,000 volunteers to bolster the Union Army. This demonstrated Lincoln's resolve to preserve the Union by force if necessary. In addition to expanding the Army, Lincoln also authorized the enlargement of the U.S. Navy. He ordered the purchase of new ships and the recruitment of additional sailors. This expansion of the Navy was crucial for blockading southern ports. It would cripple the Confederacy's ability to trade and sustain its war effort. These decisive moves sent a clear message. Lincoln was prepared to commit significant resources to defeat the rebellion. It signaled the beginning of a long and bloody conflict. The nation was now firmly on a war footing. The events of May 3, 1861, also had significant repercussions in the West, particularly in the Indian Territory. Fort Arbuckle and Fort Cobb, strategically important military outposts, were abandoned by U.S. troops. These forts were vital for maintaining order and protecting settlers in the region. The Confederacy wasted no time in occupying these abandoned forts. They understood their strategic value. The forts provided a foothold in the Indian Territory and a base from which to court Native American alliances. The date of May 3, 1861, also showcased the deep divisions within the nation. In Missouri, Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson, a staunch Confederate sympathizer, refused to send troops in response to Lincoln's call. He viewed the federal government as overstepping its bounds. In contrast, Virginia Governor John Letcher, having just joined the Confederacy, actively mobilized troops to support the Southern cause. He shared the Confederacy's belief in states' rights and the protection of slavery. These contrasting responses underscored the complex political landscape. It highlighted the difficult choices facing states as the nation hurtled towards a devastating civil war. May 4, 1861, was a monumental day in the early days of the Civil War. First, orders from U.S. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles appointed Captain Silas Horton Stringham to command the coast blockading squadron. On this very day, Captain Stringham took command at Hampton Roads, Virginia. His mission? To block the Atlantic coast from the Chesapeake Bay down to Key West in Florida. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, the steamship Queen of the West, captured earlier at Indianola, Texas, was commissioned as the receiving ship of the Confederate Navy in New Orleans. In Missouri, Confederate sympathizers seized the U.S. Ordnance Store at Kansas City, adding fuel to the already raging conflict. Over in Virginia, Colonel George A. Porterfield of the Virginia State Forces was assigned to command in northwestern Virginia. He moved to Grafton to oversee enlistments and defend the critical junction on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Also in Virginia, Brigadier General Joseph Eggleston Johnston was ordered to proceed to Harper's Ferry via the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. Accompanying him were Lieutenant Colonel Edmund Kirby Smith as Chief of Staff and Major William Henry Chase Whiting as Chief Engineer. Lastly, the USS Cumberland under Captain Garrett J. Pendergrass seized the schooner Marion, Virginia, loaded with coal. Additionally, they captured the schooner Teresa C., attempting to run the blockade off Fort Monroe with a cargo of cotton. Then on May 5th, in North Carolina, the USS Valley City, under Acting Master John A.J. Brooks, was on the prowl near the Pamlico River. The crew spotted a schooner, the J. O'Neill, attempting to escape. The sailors aboard the J. O'Neill, in a desperate bid for freedom, ran their vessel aground. But Brooks and his men weren't about to let them slip away. They captured the schooner, marking a significant victory. Meanwhile, over in Virginia, the situation was equally tense. Lieutenant Colonel S. Taylor found himself in a tough spot. Despite orders from Brigadier General Philip St. George Cocke to defend Alexandria, Taylor chose to evacuate in the face of overwhelming enemy numbers. Brigadier General Cocke, under the strategic eye of Major General Robert E. Lee, then chose a new defensive line behind Bull Run Creek near Manassas Junction. Now let's dive into the historical happenings of May 6, 1861. First up, Great Britain took a significant step by recognizing the Confederacy as a belligerent power. This recognition wasn't about acknowledging the Confederacy as a sovereign nation, but it did legitimize their actions in the eyes of international law. Meanwhile, over in the USA, the Gulf Blockading Squadron of the U.S. Navy was formed to patrol the Confederate coasts, from Key West all the way to the Mexican border. This squadron eventually became the largest Union fleet in operation during most of the Civil War. To increase efficiency, it was later divided into the East and West Gulf Blockading Squadrons. Now let's move down to the CSA. The Confederate Congress passed an act that officially recognized a state of war with the United States. They also authorized the issuing of letters of marque to private vessels, which allowed these armed privateers to capture Union ships and goods as prizes. President Jefferson Davis provided detailed instructions to ensure these privateers operated effectively. On the same day, in Arkansas, the state government passed an ordinance of secession by a vote of 69-1. This decision authorized their delegates to transfer the arsenal at Little Rock and the hospital at Napoleon to the control of the Confederate government. In Maryland, Commissioners Otho Scott, Robert M. McLean, and William J. Ross reported back on their interview with President Abraham Lincoln. They expressed the opinion that some modifications to the U.S. government's policies towards Maryland were expected. Additionally, State Brigadier General Benjamin Franklin Butler and the 8th New York Infantry took possession of the Relay House, a crucial junction of the Baltimore, Washington, and Ohio railroads, 9 miles south of Baltimore. Shifting to Missouri, pro-secession Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson made efforts to turn the state towards the Confederacy. His plans, however, were foiled at a state convention. Alongside Brigadier General Daniel Marsh Frost, Jackson aimed to seize the Union arsenal at St. Louis. Frost's small brigade of militia set up camp at Lindell Grove, known as Camp Jackson, which became a training camp for new recruits. The police commissioners of St. Louis demanded that U.S. Army Captain Nathaniel Lyon remove all federal troops from beyond the arsenal. Finally, in Tennessee, the state legislature held a secret session and ratified an alliance with the Confederate States by a vote of 66-25. This pact placed Tennessee's military forces under Confederate control and turned over public property and munitions of war to the Confederacy. The state also passed a Declaration of Independence and an ordinance adopting the Confederate Constitution, both of which were to be voted on by the people of Tennessee on June 8, 1861. While Tennessee formed an alliance with the Confederacy as an independent state, it did not formally secede on this date. Then on May 7, 1861, George T. Sinclair became the Confederate naval agent in Europe. This role was pivotal as he served until April 28, 1865, working tirelessly to secure vital supplies and ships for the Confederate Navy. Down in Alabama, the Union blockading force snagged 2 Confederate steamers, the Dick Keys and the Lewis, near Mobile. This capture dealt a significant blow to Confederate efforts to maintain supply lines. Moving to Kentucky, Union Major Robert Anderson, best known as the commander of Fort Sumter, accepted a commission as Major General of the Kentucky Militia. Although Kentucky was neutral, Anderson's Southern sympathies made him a suitable choice for preparing the state's defenses. In Maryland, railroad routes between Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Washington, D.C. were restored. This restoration ended a period of disruption caused by pro-Confederate militants, ensuring that normal traffic could resume to the capital. Over in Tennessee, the state legislature entered into a military league with the Confederate States, following its secession announcement on May 6th. This league was later ratified by popular mandate on June 24th, though Tennessee wouldn't be formally admitted to the Confederacy until May 17th. Also in Tennessee, Knoxville witnessed serious riots following the raising of a United States flag. The unrest left 1 rioter dead and many others injured, highlighting the intense local opposition to Union symbols. In Texas, Fort Davis was surrendered by the U.S. Army. The 11 officers and 300 men there refused to join the Confederacy and were imprisoned by 1,800 Confederate troops near Eastonville. Fort Davis, established in 1854, played a key role in protecting emigrants, mail coaches, and freight wagons on important travel routes. It was initially garrisoned by Lieutenant Colonel Washington Sewell and 6 companies of the 8th U.S. Infantry who were engaged in pursuing Comanches, Kiowas, and Apaches. Confederate forces occupied the fort from the spring of 1861 until the summer of 1862, when Union forces regained control. In Virginia, the state formally joined the Confederate States of America after announcing its secession on April 17, 1861. Virginia state troops occupied Arlington Heights, strategically positioned on the south bank of the Potomac River, overlooking Washington, D.C. Finally, the USS Yankee, under Lieutenant Thomas O. Selfridge, was fired upon by Confederate batteries at Gloucester Point, marking another skirmish in the ongoing conflict. On May 8, 1861, the Confederate Congress made a bold move, voting that military enlistments would last for the entire duration of the war, no longer just for a set period. Just a month earlier, they called for 82,000 more volunteers. Meanwhile, in Maryland, preparations were underway to relocate the U.S. Naval Academy from Annapolis to Newport, Rhode Island. The steamer Baltic and the USS Constitution were tasked with moving the academy to avoid the civil unrest brewing in Maryland. Over in Missouri, a significant shipment of arms arrived at Camp Jackson near St. Louis. These arms were sent by Confederate President Jefferson Davis from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to support the pro-secession militia. In Virginia, Major Thomas H. Williamson of the Virginia State Military started constructing fortifications at Aquia Creek Landing. With the help of military engineers, they worked to protect the terminus of the Fredericksburg and Potomac Railroad. To further strengthen the Confederate defenses, a second battery was added to the bluffs south of Aquia Creek's confluence with the Potomac River.